The Zorak Empire's first mistake. In the far reaches of space, where distant stars flickered like tiny candles in the vast darkness, a powerful empire was born from the ashes of countless worlds. The Zorak Empire had been expanding for millennia, stretching its tendrils across galaxies, conquering planets one by one. Known for their unmatched technological prowess and brutal military might, the Zorak had never met an opponent they couldn't crush into submission. To them, the universe was a game of dominance, and they played it with cold precision, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. On a planet known as Earth, however, something was different. Humans were primitive by the Zorak standards, barely having unlocked the secrets of the stars. They were a chaotic species, fighting wars amongst themselves, struggling to survive, and yet somehow always pushing forward. The Zorak saw this as a weakness, a species that could be easily controlled. Their leaders saw an opportunity for expansion, an opportunity to expand their empire into a new, unsuspecting world. The first Zorak scouts arrived on Earth under the cover of night, slipping silently into the atmosphere with technology that could render them invisible to the human eye. They watched as cities sprawled below them, their lights flickering like fireflies in the night. They saw the bustling activity, the movement of machines, and the sounds of a world in constant motion. But there was something unsettling about it, something the scouts couldn't shake. The humans were not as passive as they had expected. The first signs of resistance came when a small Zorak patrol tried to land in the middle of a large human city. They were swiftly confronted by a group of humans, armed, but not with weapons of advanced technology. No, these humans were wielding something far more dangerous: determination, ingenuity, and an unbreakable will to survive. The Zorak found themselves ambushed in a place they had thought was safe. The humans didn't retreat. They didn't flee. Instead, they fought back with a ferocity the Zorak had never seen before. The battle was over in minutes. The Zorak soldiers were forced to retreat, their technology unable to cope with the unpredictable nature of the humans they were facing. In their haste to escape, they left behind a broken ship, damaged equipment, and their pride. The humans had done what no other species had ever managed. They had forced the Zorak to retreat. Back on their homeworld, the Zorak High Council convened in a grand chamber, a room illuminated by the cold light of distant stars. The council was made up of the most powerful and influential members of the empire, each one more ruthless and calculating than the last. They had never known defeat, and the idea that a primitive species like humanity could challenge them was laughable. Until now. The leader of the council, General Vornak, was a being of incredible power and intellect. He was known for his tactical genius, his ability to crush enemies without breaking a sweat. He stood before a holographic display, a map of Earth spinning slowly in the center of the room. The images of the failed mission flickered on the screen, showing the Zorak soldiers retreating, the humans standing victorious. General Vornak's fists clenched at his sides. "This is impossible," Vornak muttered, his voice low but filled with anger. "These humans should not have been able to defeat us. We were too powerful, too advanced." A voice from across the room broke the silence. "Perhaps we underestimated them," Vornak said. Counselor Rithur, a tall, reptilian creature whose scales shimmered like molten lava. "We have watched them for centuries, but we have never truly seen their potential. They are unpredictable, chaotic, and their ability to adapt is unmatched." Vornak turned to face him, his sharp eyes narrowing. "What do you suggest, Rithur? Do we send more troops? Do we bombard them from orbit?" "No," Rithur replied, his tone calm yet dangerous. "If we attack with brute force, they will only fight harder. We need a different approach. We need to understand them, to learn what makes them so dangerous." The room fell silent as the council debated the next move. General Vornak was not one to back down from a challenge, but the idea of facing a species like humanity unsettled him. He had faced countless enemies, but none had ever fought back like the humans had. They were more than just a nuisance. They were a force to be reckoned with. Meanwhile, On Earth, the human resistance had grown stronger. The world had united in a way that no one had ever expected. Governments, military forces, scientists, and everyday citizens. Everyone came together with a singular purpose: to defend their home. The humans knew that they were not prepared for a full-scale war against an empire like the Zorak, but they also knew one thing above all else: they would never give up. No matter how strong their enemies were, no matter how much advanced technology the Zorak possessed, the humans had something that the aliens did not: heart. For years, humanity had been evolving in ways the Zorak could not comprehend. They had learned to fight, to adapt, and to survive under the harshest conditions. From the jungles of Africa to the icy tundras of Siberia, humans had faced countless challenges and emerged stronger each time. They had faced war, famine, and disease, and yet they had never stopped moving forward. The Zorak may have underestimated them, but humanity was ready to prove that they were far from helpless. The invasion had only just begun, and already the Zorak Empire had made their first mistake. They had failed to realize that humans would never back down from a fight. As General Vornak prepared to launch a new wave of attacks, a message arrived from the Zorak High Command. It was a contract for an assassination. The contract called for the elimination of a human leader, a high-ranking official who had been organizing the resistance against the Zorak. The message stated that the humans had no place in the Zorak Empire, and their leaders must be eradicated before they posed a real threat. Vornak stood before the hologram, staring at the contract in disbelief. He had faced many assassination contracts in his career, but something about this one felt different. He couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would be more challenging than anything he had faced before. "I'll take the contract," he said, his voice cold and steady. "But I have a feeling this one will not be as easy as the others." As Vornak prepared for the assassination, little did he know that the humans had already anticipated his every move. They were ready, not just to fight, but to outsmart the Zorak at their own game. The stage was set for a battle unlike any other. The human resistance grows stronger. As General Vornak began his preparations for the assassination mission, the humans on Earth were already preparing for a different kind of battle. The previous encounter with the Zorak invaders had shaken the alien empire's confidence, but it had only fueled the fire within humanity. The resistance was not merely a ragtag group of fighters. It was a well-organized force, a symbol of everything the Zorak had underestimated. Humans, in their very essence, were a species forged in the crucible of adversity, and they were about to show the invaders just how deep their resilience ran. The human leader who had begun to coordinate the resistance was General Sophia Walker, a woman whose reputation had spread like wildfire among the various factions of the resistance. She was a strategist, an organizer, and a fierce fighter. But what truly made her a force to be reckoned with was her ability to unite people from all walks of life. It didn't matter if someone was a soldier, a scientist, a farmer, or even a civilian. Under General Walker's leadership, they all fought as one. The Zorak Empire had made the critical mistake of assuming that humanity was a disorganized, primitive species with no real unity. What they failed to recognize was that Earth's history was littered with moments of unyielding determination. Wars, revolutions, and struggles for freedom had shaped human society in ways the Zorak could never understand. This resilience was encoded in the very DNA of every human being, and now it was going to be the Zorak's undoing. General Walker's first act was to consolidate the scattered pockets of human resistance that had been fighting in isolation. She reached out to various factions, military groups, civilian militias, scientists, and even former criminals who had skills that could be put to use. Under her leadership, these disparate groups began to form a unified front, each contributing their unique skills and knowledge to the cause. One of the most critical aspects of the resistance's strategy was the use of technology. Though humanity was technologically inferior to the Zorak in many ways, they had something the aliens didn't: an innate creativity that allowed them to adapt and innovate on the fly. While the Zorak relied on advanced weaponry and tactics, humans focused on developing guerrilla-style warfare tactics and improvised weapons that could level the playing field. In hidden underground labs, human engineers worked around the clock to reverse engineer Zorak technology. They studied the alien weaponry and spacecraft they had recovered from the first failed invasion, using their knowledge of human ingenuity to create makeshift weapons capable of challenging the Zorak's superior tech. What they lacked in firepower, they made up for with resourcefulness. Humans didn't need to build an army of advanced war machines to defeat the Zorak. They just needed to outthink them. Sophia Walker was at the heart of these efforts. Her tactical brilliance and ability to predict enemy movements made her an invaluable asset to the resistance. She knew that the Zorak would likely try to regroup and strike again, but this time, they wouldn't be met with unprepared forces. She used the element of surprise to her advantage, organizing raids and ambushes against the Zorak supply lines, crippling their ability to wage war. It wasn't just the adults who were part of this resistance. The children of Earth, too, were drawn into the fight, though not in the way the Zorak might have expected. The human spirit was not confined to age or strength. It was a force that transcended the physical. Young children, some no older than 10, began using their natural creativity to build makeshift traps and distractions to help the adults. In cities across the globe, children crafted devices that would mislead Zorak patrols, leading them into traps or leading them in the wrong direction entirely. The resistance fighters were relentless. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their homes, their families, and their very existence. And this made them a far more dangerous enemy than the Zorak had ever anticipated. Meanwhile, General Vornak and the Zorak High Command were preparing for what they believed would be a simple mission. The assassination contract on General Walker was seen as the key to ending the resistance. If they could eliminate the leader, they believed the rest of humanity would crumble without their guiding hand. They underestimated the power of a symbol. They underestimated what it meant to fight for one's people. Vornak's forces began to move stealthily into human territory, ready to take out Walker. Their technology was superior in many ways, but they lacked the ability to anticipate how far humans would go to protect their own. General Walker's communications network was constantly shifting to avoid detection, and her forces were growing in number. The Zorak knew their target, but what they didn't know was how unpredictable the humans were, how capable they were of changing the course of a battle in an instant. The first signs of trouble came when the Zorak forces attempted to infiltrate a human stronghold. The base was located in the mountains of northern Colorado, a remote area that the humans had converted into a fully operational command center. What the Zorak didn't account for was the presence of an elite group of human soldiers who had been trained in the art of stealth. They were veterans from every corner of Earth, soldiers who had been through wars and skirmishes on their own soil, and they knew the terrain better than any alien ever could. The Zorak strike team moved in under the cover of night, cloaked in advanced technology that made them invisible to human eyes. They had the element of surprise, but the humans knew better than to rely solely on vision to detect their enemies. Using motion sensors, thermal imaging, and old-fashioned listening posts, the humans were able to detect the Zorak infiltrators long before they reached their target. A massive firefight erupted in the early hours of the morning. The Zorak, with their superior weaponry and technology, launched a series of devastating attacks. But the humans fought back with everything they had. They used the environment to their advantage, taking cover behind rocks and structures, ambushing the Zorak from all directions. In the midst of the chaos, a group of human engineers managed to disable a Zorak communications relay, cutting off the invaders from their reinforcements. The Zorak were forced to retreat once again, their plan foiled by a species they thought was beneath them. The battle left General Vornak furious, but it also revealed a critical flaw in the Zorak's understanding of humanity. They could not be easily intimidated. Humans would not fold under pressure. They would adapt, survive, and most importantly, fight back. As General Walker watched the footage of the failed attack, She knew that the Zorak were just beginning to realize what they were up against. The next phase of the war would be different. Humanity had proven that it could fight. Now, it was time to prove it could win. The battle for Earth was far from over. The Zorak Empire may have been ruthless, but humanity had something far more powerful: the will to never give up. And with that, the stage was set for an epic confrontation that would change the fate of both worlds forever. The unseen strength of humanity. As General Vornak paced the war room aboard the Zorak flagship, his mind raced with fury and confusion. The humans had once again proven to be an enigma, an unpredictable force that seemed to thrive on adversity. What was it about them? Their technology was primitive compared to the Zoraks, their tactics unrefined, and yet they had resisted every effort the Empire had made to break them. It didn't make sense. The Zorak were an empire built on conquest, and they were used to annihilating weaker species with ease. But humanity, they had become a thorn in the side of the most powerful force in the galaxy, and Vornak could not figure out why. Back on Earth, General Sophia Walker sat quietly in her command center, staring out at the sprawling valley below. The resistance had come so far, but she knew that the worst was yet to come. The Zorak were relentless. They would not stop until humanity was crushed beneath their boot. Yet the humans had something the Zorak didn't understand. Their strength didn't lie in their technology or their weaponry, but in something far deeper. Their strength lay in their unity, their spirit, and their willingness to fight for one another. General Walker's eyes scanned the room as her commanders and strategists gathered around the table, all deep in discussion about their next move. Maps of enemy positions, intelligence reports, and images of Zorak war machines filled the screen in front of them. But despite all the information, despite their impressive knowledge and resources, they still didn't have an answer for how to defeat the Zorak once and for all. Every victory was temporary. Every tactical success was met with a relentless counterattack. The Zorak didn't give up, and neither would humanity. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Walker said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but her determination cut through the air like a blade. "We've been on the defensive for too long. We need to make them fear us, to show them that we are not some insignificant species to be swept aside." The room nodded in agreement, but even they knew it wouldn't be easy. The Zorak had the advantage in firepower, in resources, and in sheer numbers. They had advanced fleets, ships that could tear apart entire cities with a single blow. But the one thing the Zorak could never understand was the nature of humanity itself, their ability to overcome the odds, to find a way when there seemed to be no way. In every corner of Earth, people were coming together, pooling their knowledge and resources. The resistance wasn't just a military force anymore. It was a revolution, a movement of ordinary humans fighting for the survival of their planet. Some came from the chaos of cities, where the threat of the Zorak was ever present. Others were farmers, scientists, and engineers, people who had never considered themselves warriors, but who now found themselves at the forefront of the conflict. And among them were children, too. Children who had never known peace, who grew up in the shadow of war, and who now crafted ingenious traps, weapons, and distractions to aid the adults in their struggle. They were all part of the same cause. In the harsh deserts of Africa, a team of human engineers had created a new type of camouflage technology that could render entire platoons invisible to Zorak sensors. This breakthrough had allowed human fighters to move unseen through enemy territory, launching ambushes that disoriented the Zorak and left them vulnerable. In South America, a group of resistance fighters had developed a method of jamming the Zorak's communication networks, causing confusion and disrupting their coordination. On the frozen plains of Siberia, a secret weapons facility had created devices that could disable Zorak technology, turning their own machines against them. But it wasn't just these technological advancements that were fueling the resistance. It was the unrelenting human spirit. Time and again, humans had fought with everything they had, refusing to give up even when it seemed like all was lost. They had seen entire cities fall, entire populations wiped out by Zorak attacks. Yet every time the Zorak thought they had broken the will of humanity, they were proven wrong. One of the most powerful symbols of this strength was Captain Julian Cross, a former soldier who had lost his entire family in the early days of the Zorak invasion. His wife and children had perished in an attack on his home, but instead of crumbling in despair, Julian had found new purpose. He became a leader in the resistance, rallying soldiers, civilians, and former enemies to join the fight. His experience on the battlefield made him a formidable tactician, but his heart, his unshakable determination to protect humanity, was what made him a legend among the resistance. Julian's story was not unique. Across the globe, countless humans had found strength in the face of unimaginable loss. There was the elderly woman who led a group of refugees through the jungles of Southeast Asia, using her knowledge of survival to keep them safe. There was the group of teenage hackers who had infiltrated Zorak communication networks, sending out false intelligence and sowing discord within the enemy ranks. And there was Dr. Rachel Thompson, a scientist who had once worked for the government, now using her knowledge to develop countermeasures against Zorak weapons, her research fueling the human resistance's technological advancements. The world had been shattered by the invasion. But from the wreckage, something beautiful had emerged: unity. Humanity was no longer divided by borders or differences. The war had turned every person into a soldier, every voice into a rallying cry for freedom. The resistance was no longer just a defense force. It was a symbol of hope, a beacon in the darkness. As General Walker stood in her command center, she knew that the tide of the war was shifting. The Zorak had made their first mistake by underestimating humanity. They had thought of humans as weak, as inferior, but the reality was that humans had faced countless challenges throughout their history, and each time, they had emerged stronger. The Zorak had no idea what they were up against, and the longer they underestimated humanity, the more the resistance grew, the more it evolved. Vornak, on the other hand, had begun to feel the weight of his mistakes. His confidence had been shattered, and each failure against the humans only served to deepen his frustration. But more than that, it fueled a growing realization. The Zorak were not as invincible as they had once believed. Humans were not just a species of survival. They were a species of innovation, of reinvention, and that made them the most dangerous enemy the Zorak had ever encountered. As the two forces prepared for the next battle, one thing became clear. The outcome of this war would not be determined by superior technology or overwhelming numbers. It would be determined by the one thing the Zorak could not understand: the will of humanity to never surrender. The resistance was ready. And for the first time, the Zorak would face an enemy that would not simply bend to their will. The stage was set for a conflict that would echo through the annals of history, a battle between two forces, one fueled by technology, the other by the unyielding strength of the human spirit. The turning point. The war between humanity and the Zorak Empire had reached a critical juncture. The Zorak had underestimated their human adversaries for far too long, dismissing them as a primitive, disjointed species. They believed their superior technology, vast resources, and ruthless military might would be more than enough to subdue Earth and its inhabitants. But what the Zorak failed to recognize was that humanity was more than just a species. It was a force, driven by something deeper than technology or sheer power: the will to fight for survival, for freedom, and for the future. On Earth, the resistance continued to grow in strength, its resolve hardened by every battle fought and every loss endured. The small victories that had once seemed inconsequential were now adding up, creating a ripple effect that could not be ignored. The tide was turning, but it was not yet certain whether the humans had the strength to win. General Sophia Walker, who had become the heart of the resistance, knew that the time had come to strike a decisive blow. She could sense it in the air, an undeniable shift. The Zorak were no longer the untouchable, omnipotent force they once appeared to be. The constant pressure from the resistance, their guerrilla tactics, their ability to disrupt the Zorak's supply lines and communications, had begun to take its toll. The Empire was stretched thin, its forces spread out across multiple fronts, its command structure fractured by the relentless unpredictability of human tactics. In the midst of all this, General Walker found herself staring down a path that was as dangerous as it was necessary. The Zorak had set their sights on a key strategic location, a massive underground facility in the heart of what had once been the United States. This facility, known as the Nexus, was a research center that housed some of humanity's most cutting-edge technology, developed by some of the brightest minds Earth had to offer. If the Zorak were able to seize control of the Nexus, it could turn the tide of the war in their favor, giving them access to the very technologies humanity had been developing to fight back. The Nexus was heavily guarded, surrounded by layers of defenses that even the Zorak, with their advanced weaponry, had struggled to breach. But the Zorak had been relentless in their pursuit. They had gathered a massive fleet of ships and thousands of soldiers, preparing to launch a full-scale assault to capture the facility. The human resistance knew that they had only one shot at stopping them. If the Nexus fell, Earth's hope would fall with it. Sophia called for an emergency council meeting. The leaders of the resistance gathered in a secure underground bunker, their faces grim as they assessed the situation. Among them were Julian Cross, the battle-hardened captain who had become a symbol of the human spirit; Dr. Rachel Thompson, the scientist whose innovations had become the backbone of the Resistance's technological advancements; and a handful of military strategists, all of whom had devoted their lives to this cause. Together, they were the last line of defense against the Zorak. "We don't have much time," Walker began, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We know the Zorak are coming. The Nexus is critical, and we can't afford to let them take it. If they do, we'll be at their mercy." Julian Cross, his face weathered and worn from years of conflict, nodded. "We've held them off so far, but this won't be like the other skirmishes. We're going to have to fight smarter, not harder. The Zorak may have brute strength, but we have something they can't anticipate. We can't defeat them with firepower alone, but we can outmaneuver them." The group fell into a deep discussion, weighing their options. They could attempt to evacuate the Nexus, but doing so would be a tacit admission of defeat. The Zorak would never let it go, and humanity would lose the most significant technological advantage it had. The only option left was to stand and fight, to defend the Nexus at all costs. After hours of intense planning, they came up with a plan. They would use every resource at their disposal, every last weapon, every last soldier, and every last piece of human ingenuity. The Zorak were coming in force, but the Resistance was prepared to turn that very force against them. The key was to lure the Zorak into a trap, using their own hubris against them. Humanity's strength, as they had learned in the earlier stages of the war, was not in their numbers but in their adaptability. The humans had the ability to think on their feet, to turn even the most hopeless situation into an opportunity. And that was exactly what they intended to do. Meanwhile, General Vornak stood at the helm of his warship, his cold eyes fixed on Earth's surface. He could feel the tension in the air. The humans had been a thorn in his side from the very beginning. But now, with the Nexus within his grasp, he could almost taste victory. His fleet was ready, his forces were primed, and his plan was set into motion. He had underestimated humanity before, but now he was confident that this would be the final blow. The Zorak forces launched their assault on the Nexus facility early one morning. The sky above the facility darkened as the first wave of Zorak ships descended, their engines humming with ominous power. Thousands of Zorak soldiers stormed the ground, their advanced armor and weapons gleaming in the light of the distant sun. They were met by the full force of the human resistance, who had entrenched themselves in the hills surrounding the facility. The battle was fierce, a chaotic symphony of explosions, gunfire, and the roar of engines. The Zorak pushed forward relentlessly, but the humans were ready. They had anticipated every move the aliens would make, and their traps sprang to life. The Zorak found themselves caught in the same ambushes that had made previous resistance attacks so effective. Mines detonated beneath their feet, sentries unleashed barrages of fire from concealed positions, and guerrilla units darted through the shadows, striking the invaders where they least expected it. Despite the human ingenuity, the Zorak were a formidable foe. Their numbers seemed endless, and their weaponry was more advanced. For every Zorak soldier that fell, 2 more took their place. But the humans didn't waver. They fought with everything they had, because they knew that if they lost, there would be no tomorrow. As the battle raged on, the turning point came when Dr. Rachel Thompson, accompanied by a small team of engineers, activated the final piece of humanity's secret weapon, a signal jammer that would disrupt the Zorak's fleet communication systems. The Zorak had relied on their superior coordination to maintain their assault, but now that advantage was slipping away. Without communication between their forces, the Zorak began to falter, unable to coordinate their attacks. It was a brief window, but it was enough. General Walker and Julian Cross led the charge, rallying their forces for one final push. The Zorak, now disorganized and confused, were met with an all-out assault from the human resistance. The battle that had seemed unwinnable began to shift in humanity's favor. As the Zorak forces began to retreat, General Vornak watched in disbelief from his command ship. His perfect plan had unraveled, not because of superior weapons or strategy, but because of the one thing the Zorak could never understand: the strength of the human spirit. The Nexus was secured. The Zorak had suffered a crushing defeat, and for the first time in this war, it seemed as though humanity might just have a fighting chance after all. The humans had turned the tide, and the Zorak Empire was beginning to realize that the real strength of Earth lay not in its weapons, but in its people. The last stand of the Zorak Empire. The victory at the Nexus had been a pivotal moment in the war, a sign that the humans were not just surviving. They were beginning to thrive in the face of overwhelming odds. The Zorak Empire, known for its vast and efficient military, had suffered a massive blow, one that reverberated across the stars. The humans had not only defended the most crucial facility in the world, but they had proven that their strength wasn't just in numbers or technology, but in their indomitable will to survive. However, General Vornak, though furious, was not a leader who would be easily defeated. His pride had been wounded, but he had faced defeat before. He had learned to fight harder after every loss, and now he was more determined than ever to crush humanity's resistance once and for all. He knew the humans had struck a blow to the heart of his plans, but he was determined to do whatever it took to break them. The Zorak were nothing if not relentless. Aboard his flagship, Vornak stared out into the void of space, his mind calculating his next move. He had lost the Nexus, but the war was far from over. He understood now that humanity was not a fluke. It was a force, and one that had to be dealt with quickly. The Zorak Empire had already set in motion a new strategy, a full-scale invasion of Earth, one that would not only overwhelm the resistance, but would destroy humanity's very will to fight. Vornak's new plan was simple yet devastating. He would send his most formidable fleet to Earth, an armada so vast that it would block out the sun itself. With it, he would obliterate key cities, dismantle the last remnants of human civilization, and eradicate the resistance once and for all. He had learned from his previous failures. Brute force was necessary, but it would be nothing without psychological warfare. He would break their spirit, destroy their hope, and leave them with nothing. Meanwhile, on Earth, General Sophia Walker and the leaders of the resistance were preparing for what they knew would be the final confrontation. The victory at the Nexus had given them a brief respite, but they knew the Zorak would come again. And when they did, they would come with everything they had. The Resistance's forces were spread thin, and there was no denying the reality of their situation. They were fighting a war against a nearly unbeatable opponent. But humanity had something the Zorak didn't: unity, resilience, and the will to never give up. Every inch of Earth had been fortified. Every stronghold turned into a bastion of resistance. The people were ready. They had fought back against impossible odds before, and they were prepared to do so again. Sophia stood before a group of her most trusted generals, strategists, and engineers. The room was heavy with the weight of what was to come. They knew that this could be the end of the war, one way or another. They had fought hard for so long, and the Zorak were finally bringing the fight to Earth's doorstep. It was all or nothing now. "The Zorak fleet is on its way," Sophia said, her voice steady, but filled with an unspoken urgency. "We've seen the scale of their power, and we know what they're capable of. But this time, we're not going to wait for them to attack. We're going to take the fight to them." There was a murmur of agreement in the room. It was risky, it was dangerous, but it was the only option left. If they could strike first, they might be able to cripple the Zorak before they had a chance to land on Earth's surface. If they failed, however, Earth would be lost. The resistance would be lost. "We have one advantage," said Julian Cross, his eyes narrowing as he looked over the plans. "The Zorak believe we're on the defensive. They think we're weak, disorganized. But what they don't know is that we've learned how to fight like them. We've studied their tactics, their technology. We can use that against them." It was a strategy that had worked for humanity time and again throughout the war, using the enemy's strengths against them, outwitting them when they least expected it. And it would be no different now. The humans would strike at the heart of the Zorak fleet, using a combination of guerrilla tactics, traps, and modified technology they had stolen or repurposed from the Zorak. The plan was simple but audacious. First, the resistance would use their superior knowledge of Earth's geography to lay hidden traps across the globe. In key locations, such as major military hubs and Zorak-occupied cities, they would implant devices capable of disrupting the Zorak's communication networks and weapon systems. With their communications disabled, the Zorak would be forced to fight in disarray. The humans would then launch surprise strikes at the most vulnerable points of the fleet, hoping to take down key Zorak warships and create chaos within the enemy ranks. It wasn't enough to simply attack the fleet, though. The humans needed to show the Zorak that they were not just fighting a military battle. They were fighting a war of ideas, of survival. They needed to remind the Zorak that humanity was a species that could adapt to any situation, that could rise from the ashes, no matter how many times it was knocked down. The world's leaders, once divided by borders and ideologies, now stood united under a single banner: survival. And it was this unity that would serve as the ultimate weapon. They would fight not just for Earth, but for every human life, every soul on the planet, and every future generation. This was no longer just a war for land or power. It was a war for the very soul of humanity. The Zorak fleet arrived in Earth's orbit within days, a vast armada that eclipsed the sky with its overwhelming presence. Ships of all sizes and shapes, each one armed to the teeth with advanced weaponry, lined up in formation, preparing for the final assault. General Vornak stood aboard his flagship, his face a mask of determination. His fleet was prepared for victory. His enemies would be wiped out, and the Empire's domination would be assured. But the Zorak had once again underestimated humanity. As the massive fleet descended, the first wave of resistance fighters, using stealth technology and improvised weapons, struck at the heart of the Zorak's military command center. The human attack was swift and precise, hitting the fleet's vulnerable spots and disrupting their communications. The Zorak, caught off guard, struggled to regain control. But it was too late. The humans had seized the initiative. The battle raged on for hours, a chaotic clash of technology, tactics, and sheer willpower. On the ground, human forces fought with everything they had, while above, resistance ships launched daring attacks on Zorak warships. Every move was calculated, every strike aimed at weakening the Zorak's hold on Earth. But as the resistance pushed forward, General Vornak's final weapon was unleashed, a devastating orbital bombardment aimed at wiping out humanity's last strongholds. The sky lit up with flashes of light as the Zorak unleashed hell upon the planet, hoping to break the humans once and for all. Yet, through the fire and destruction, humanity held firm. The resistance had not only survived, it had adapted. The Zorak may have believed they could destroy Earth, but they could never destroy the heart of humanity, the one thing they could never comprehend, their unyielding spirit to fight, no matter the cost. As the battle reached its peak, Sophia Walker and Julian Cross stood side by side, watching the smoke rise from the battlefield. This was humanity's last stand. But they knew something the Zorak didn't. No matter how fierce the fight, no matter how many times they were knocked down, humanity would always rise again. The Zorak may have brought their best to Earth, but they were fighting something far stronger than they could ever understand. The rise of humanity's last hope. The skies over Earth had been a battlefield for days. The Zorak Empire, despite its vast military superiority, was being slowly, painfully pushed back by humanity's resistance. Earth was bruised, its surface scarred by the fierce bombardments and violent skirmishes between the invaders and the defenders, but humanity had refused to yield. Every inch of the planet was contested, and the humans were learning, adapting, and surprising their enemies at every turn. In the shattered remains of New York City, now a war zone, General Sophia Walker and her team surveyed the devastation. The once towering skyscrapers now lay in ruins, smoke rising from their wreckage. The streets were choked with debris, and the skyline was a shadow of what it had been. Yet, amidst the chaos, the resilience of humanity was evident. Small groups of survivors had come together to form pockets of resistance, using the rubble and wreckage to their advantage. "We've held them off for now," Sophia said, her voice as cold and calculated as the battlefield itself. "But we're not out of the woods yet. The Zorak are relentless. Their fleets are still in orbit, and we know they have more resources than we can handle in the long run." Julian Cross, standing beside her, his face grim and battle-worn, nodded in agreement. "They're not just fighting for victory anymore. They're fighting to break our spirit. But that's where they've made their mistake. They thought they could crush us with brute force, but they've underestimated what keeps us going." Sophia's eyes narrowed, reflecting a fire that had never been extinguished, no matter how many battles had been fought. Humanity's strength isn't in our armies or weapons alone. It's in our unity, our refusal to give up. Every day we survive, we prove them wrong, and they know it. But even as they spoke, they both knew the truth. They were running out of time. The Zorak had only intensified their assault, and while humanity had gained some ground, the Empire's overwhelming technological advantage was still a significant threat. General Vornak, the Zorak commander, had proven to be an opponent unlike any they had faced before. Cold, calculating, and ruthless. His forces seemed endless, and with each passing day, Earth's resistance grew thinner. Sophia turned to her command staff, a group of seasoned veterans who had become family to her over the course of the war. "We need a game changer. The Zorak have us cornered, and we're running out of options. We need to strike directly at the heart of their fleet, cut off their resources, and show them we won't bow to them. It's the only way we can turn this around." A deep silence fell over the room. The plan was risky. If they failed, it would mean the end of the resistance, and perhaps the end of humanity's fight altogether. But for the first time since the war began, Sophia felt a sense of certainty. They had come this far. They had fought tooth and nail, bled for every inch they had gained, and proven their worth. Now it was time to give everything they had for the final push. "We've been using our ingenuity to hold them back." Dr. Rachel Thompson, the brilliant scientist whose research had fueled much of humanity's technological advances, spoke up, breaking the silence. "We've repurposed Zorak tech, but it's not enough. We need to create something that can take out their flagship, something that will cripple their command structure and their ability to coordinate." Sophia turned to Rachel, her eyes sharp. "What are you suggesting?" Rachel's voice was low but filled with the weight of what she was about to propose. "We've been working on a prototype for a high-energy disruptor weapon. It's based on their own technology, but with a human twist. It's capable of disabling their ship's power cores, rendering them useless. But it's not perfect yet. It's unstable and dangerous, And if we use it in an untested way, we might not get another chance. How long will it take to deploy it? Julian asked. Rachel hesitated. We have enough to make one shot. One chance. It's risky, and there's no guarantee it will work. But if it does, we'll disable their flagship and send the rest of their fleet into disarray. It could be the breakthrough we need. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. One shot. One chance to end it all. It was more than they had ever hoped for, but it also came with the heaviest of risks. There was no turning back. If they chose to do this, they would be committing to a fight that could very well cost them everything. After a long pause, Sophia finally nodded. We don't have a choice. We take that shot. If we fail, we die fighting. But if it works, we will show the Zorak exactly what we're capable of. The plan was set into motion. The human forces mobilized quickly, rallying around the desperate hope that this would be their final chance. The resistance had learned to move swiftly, disappearing into the urban jungle and striking where the Zorak least expected it. They would need to infiltrate the Zorak's outer defense perimeter, disable their shields, and deploy the disruptor weapon on the flagship. It would require every ounce of strength they had, and every moment counted. As the human forces approached the Zorak fleet's outer defenses, the resistance fighters worked together seamlessly, each movement coordinated, each strike precise. They had perfected their guerrilla tactics over the course of the war, and now they were ready to use them to their full advantage. In the shadows of destroyed cities, hidden within the wreckage, they struck with terrifying efficiency. The Zorak, though technologically superior, found themselves struggling to adapt to this new form of warfare, a battle of wits, and will rather than sheer force. The final assault was nearing. General Vornak, confident in his fleet's overwhelming power, had never once considered that the humans could still be a threat. His forces were scattered across the Earth's atmosphere, ensuring the total annihilation of all remaining resistance pockets. But what he didn't see was that the resistance had already infiltrated his flagship. Sophia and her team, armed with modified human tech, approached the flagship's core. The Zorak ships, once an unstoppable force, were now vulnerable, their defenses weakened by the human tactics that had kept them off balance. And just as Vornak's forces were about to launch a devastating assault on Earth's last stronghold, the human team activated the disruptor. A blinding pulse of energy surged through the flagship, knocking out its core systems and throwing the Zorak forces into chaos. The massive ships, once intimidating and untouchable, were now rendered powerless, drifting aimlessly in space. Vornak's command structure crumbled in an instant. The resistance had done the impossible. They had taken out the heart of the Zorak fleet. But the victory came at a cost. The disruptor weapon was a one-time use, and its energy drained every last reserve of power from the human forces. The fight wasn't over yet, but the Zorak fleet was no longer a unified force. The humans had turned the tide, creating the opening they needed for the final push to drive the Zorak from Earth forever. In the wake of the disruptor's success, Earth's forces rallied. The final battles would be bloody, and the war was far from over. But humanity had done what no one had ever thought possible. They had struck the Zorak Empire at its core and begun the long, hard fight for victory. The Zorak had underestimated humanity before, but now they were about to learn the true meaning of resistance.